Well, thank you, Mike. And I just want to introduce my fellow panelists for this next session, the Clinic How-To and Basics, which is really the core of what to expect, because we're gearing this to new volunteers as well as people who have volunteered for a while. So I want to introduce my fellow panelists, Kristen Larson of TCF Bank on my right, and David March of Target Corporation. All the bios for the speakers are on the second page of the materials, and we tried to focus a little bit more than usual on pro bono activities, which are considerable for many of our panelists as volunteers. Another housekeeping matter, we don't have a formal Q&A session at the end, so feel free to ask questions throughout if there's anything you'd like us to clarify, or we're available. And also we're making a videotape of this session, not for you, but for others in your organization who may be interested in volunteering in the future. And we're going to try to make it available on the website or somehow available to future volunteers along with the written materials. So I wanted to point out the written materials. You got two sets. One is the agenda with the PowerPoint for the Legal Basics session coming up a little bit later. But we're especially proud of the volunteer handbook. One of the great things about doing a program is that it gives you the motivation to get some written materials pulled together. It's brand new, and our operations committee that planned this program has worked really hard on it. I wanted to especially mention Justina Roberts, a longtime volunteer, especially while she was a law student, but also as an attorney, who really brought a lot of information together. And the appendices especially pull a lot of information together in one place that we have had just scattered around or maybe available at the clinic sites. So we'll also refer to that today, and that should be available as a PDF on the website as well soon. So as far as the substantive matters that we're talking about, the purpose is not to get everyone to give exactly the same legal advice from the same script. Everyone should bring their own talents, and I wish everyone could have heard Richard Davis from U.S. Bank, U.S. Bancorp, or U.S. Bank at the gala last week for LegalCORPS, talking about what a blessing it is for people to be able to volunteer using their own talents. It was really an inspiring address, but the idea is everyone should bring their own talents, but it helps if everyone's comfortable with what you might encounter, and that's this first part of the session, as well as just some vocabulary, because we're asked to give advice in areas that we don't usually practice in, just because of the breadth of what comes in. So the title, What to Expect When You're Volunteering, relates to that, but as you might guess, the title is based on a recent movie, What to Expect When You're Expecting, and that title was based on a book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. So, of course, our committee, having a lot of lawyers on it, debated for a long time about which book or movie to name the session after, and I just thought I'd tell you about a few of the names that didn't make the cut. For example, we considered Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Trademarks, but were afraid to ask. That did not make the cut, though. So we decided to try to make it a little more entertaining. So people, speculated maybe it should be Harry Potter and the Corporate Veil, sort of a magic thing, corporate veil, turn invisible, but that didn't make the grade either. So then we decided we really wanted to try to boost attendance at this thing, which we've gotten a very nice attendance, but probably even greater if we had called it 50 Shades of Business Entities, but that got rejected too. So what to expect? In any event, I will, after that little interlude, I'm going to ask Mike to talk a little bit about clients coming into the clinic, sort of the first part of what happens at the clinic. So client intake.
Well, the client intake procedure varies from site to site. Two of the clinics that we operate, the one in Minneapolis and the one in St. Paul, are drop-in clinics. In the others, I'll start with the others. The clients sign up in advance for a 30-minute slot by calling one of our partners, a SCORE office, or SCORE is a volunteer business advisory organization. And outside the metro area, we partner with the small business development centers. They're all over the state. They sign up. The clients sign up We find out ahead of time who's coming at what time and possibly what their subject matter might be. In St. Paul, the first person that they encounter and they come in is a SCORE volunteer, and the SCORE volunteer will sign them up. In Minneapolis, it's the first ones they see are the volunteers. I should mention in the metro area clinics, we usually have law student volunteer assistants there, and they can play a large role in the intake, making sure that things are going smoothly, keeping an eye, make sure people are filling out the forms and that kind of thing. So it will vary, but they will all sign a registration sheet that we'll talk about in a bit. You should know that every site, including the Minneapolis site where the first line is the volunteer, we are partnering with, or we're right beside, in the same location as business advisors. And so the clinic, it'll be either SCORE or Small Business Development Center staff. And so when folks, and this is very frequent, with the clients actually need general business advice, you've got someone right next door, right on hand, to be able to refer them to and get them into a broad range of business support services. So,
great. And yeah, I'll mention that for those of you volunteering in the Twin Cities, one of the great pleasures of doing that at those clinics is to get to know some of the SCORE counselors who are mainly retired business people who provide that advice. But I understand that they can get that advice at the outstate locations for the long-distance clinics through the business development centers, who also do the client intake, as I understand it. Okay, well, Mike, I guess the other thing I wanted to mention, just so that people are familiar with it, because sometimes there's confusion about it, is whether there are income guidelines for people walking into the clinic.
We do not apply income guidelines for access to the brief advice clinics. None of our partners apply any income guidelines to access to their services. We do strongly encourage our clients to be able to fill out the income information part of the registration form so we can get an internal idea of who we're serving. Over the years, we've determined that the vast majority of people who come to these brief advice clinics would qualify for our full representation assistance. But when we find out, when we can see there that maybe they wouldn't, we still have a value to this, because part of LegalCORPS' mission is to educate the public on the value of legal services. And even if they would not qualify for a full representation assistance, there's public service there, and they become more aware of what their needs are. They also become better educated consumers of legal services.
Right. So that's part of the mission of LegalCorps as well, and that's why we can all feel really good about it, even if once in a while there's someone who comes to a brief advice session who obviously could afford a lawyer, but a lot of people just don't know where to go for help. So they become better educated consumers. Mike mentioned the client registration form, and I will turn to that. It's called a client data sheet, but it has registration information on it. Those of you who volunteer for the clinics, yes, are familiar with it. It's one of the appendices, Appendix C, in the handbook, and Appendix D is actually a set of a checklist for how to fill it out. And so that's something maybe before for the new volunteers before your first session to get familiar with. There are just a couple things that I would mention that are important. As Mike said, it's important for us to have the income information. And by the way, in terms of the income guidelines, one thing I forgot to mention is that one of the other appendices, Appendix B in the handbook, is the set of income guidelines, at least currently, for full representation, because that question comes up sometimes in the clinic when we say, for a longer an issue that we can't cover in the clinic, you can apply for full representation if you meet the income guidelines. Well, what are those? Well, now they're in the handbook, at least at the current time.
And I'll mention that we always try to maintain a sample of that on our website, so when prospective clients for full rep can see it, you could see it too. So.
Great. And so a couple other things I'll point out. On the back of the front of the form, the client fills out, and we should really try to make sure that they fill that out completely. The back of the form has information that the volunteer attorney fills out. There's a brief description of legal problem on the back, and the practices vary a lot on the length of the description. We have a sample there that's probably about average. Sometimes it's a few words. Sometimes it's longer. If there's a law student assistant or a paralegal assistant, as there often are at these clinics, it's helpful for them to have the back of the form and fill that out as the session goes so the attorney can focus on the client and listening. I'll also point out the box on the front, which is the client acknowledgement, the equivalent of the engagement letter for the brief advice session. And it's very important, obviously, that that gets signed. It's an acknowledgement of the limited representation and an acknowledgement that the attorney has different conflicts of interest obligations. And we'll get to that in the legal ethics portion of the program, but this is what makes that an acknowledgement of the client as well. The other thing I'll mention really quickly is that the brief advice sessions are almost always 30 minutes. And it's usually broken up, or usually it's a longer session broken up into 30-minute time slots. So it's challenging to give useful advice, but it gets easier as you do the clinics, but we're also going to give you some tips on how to be effective and how to be prepared for the possibility that you may get too many or too few clients for the sessions. So Mike, I just wanted to spend a couple minutes on what should the client walk away with in terms of knowledge or piece of paper.
Well, the most important thing, whether have a handout to give to them or just verbally, is so they understand that the range of services that prospectively they could get through LegalCORPS. And so we just let them know that if they need much more that can be provided in a 30-minute brief advice session, that they can apply to LegalCORPS for full representation assistance, and it would just be as though they had a fee-paying arrangement. That the easiest way is to refer them to the website, which has all of the forms, all of the information for them. Some locations we have handouts that just explain what LegalCORPS is and how to contact us and that kind of thing. That's the main bit of information. We are in the process of working through some procedural changes, which we will also be asking for some survey type of questions. So we may be asking in the future, to get some information from the clients about that as they leave. So.
Okay, and I think that it's important to know we did get some survey information that we'll refer to a couple times. Some follow-up calls that get done by volunteers to some of the clients. And one of the big things that we learned, especially in the Twin Cities clinics, was that a big percentage, and I don't remember the percentage, of clients didn't know about the other services LegalCORPS has to offer. So again, one of the things that we wanted to impart on our volunteers was all the great things that LegalCORPS does, including both the full representation and the inventor. People always say investor, but inventor, or too many business lawyers. Inventor assistance program that provides patent law advice for free. So great services. And I assume at the long distance clinics, David, it's sort of a similar educational process, and I'd assume the results would be similar, that we want to try to impart that a little bit more in a brief amount of time. So. So, Mike, I guess a couple of other questions just about logistics for the clinics. We refer people sometimes with different questions to either to LegalCORPS or maybe to other attorneys. Can we talk a little bit about those resources? Yeah,
and you'll notice on the back of the registration sheet where it's filled out by the attorneys, at the very bottom, we'll be sure and check. If they're referred to LegalCORPS, we'll have someone follow up, encourage them to contact LegalCORPS, but we also will try to keep track and have someone follow up with them after the clinics if they need ongoing representation. If what they come in and talk about has nothing to do with business law, then which sometimes occurs, then we can refer them to the Hennepin County Bar Association lawyer referrals, and some other, legal aid society, perhaps, that kind of thing. We want to be acting as a clearinghouse for them there, so that even if it's not a business law matter, we still try to assist them to get them in the right direction. So.
Well, right, and I will point out too that sometimes clients come in who obviously or who would not meet the income guidelines. Maybe they know that, or maybe the attorney, can find that out. And so in the Twin Cities, that Hennepin County law.
Statewide,
Bar Association.
There's a Minnesota Find a Lawyer.
Okay, so there's statewide resources.
And that's only online, and you can refer them there, and that's by the Minnesota State Bar Association, and they can find a local attorney in the territory that the area of law that they need. Okay.
And David, I don't know, the long distance locations, do you ever have the opportunity to refer people to some clearinghouse?
Yeah, I think the referral process works the same. We fill out the forms and refer them back to LegalCORPS for a referral outside to lawyers. Okay.
But it sounds like there are also statewide resources for people to find lawyers in particular areas. And sometimes people just have, again, no idea where to turn. They could afford a lawyer, but they don't know where to find one. So it's helpful to know. Now, I know at least in the Twin Cities clinics, the client data sheet on the back, one of the things that we track is whether the person was referred to LegalCORPS or to, I know in the Twin Cities it's Hennepin County, and I assume the other forms at least have a place to check a box if the person is referred to LegalCORPS, and that way LegalCORPS has some ability to track at least who was referred. So one other thing before I hand it off is just some of the written resources available to volunteers, because we have one question back here.
Oh, well, I know maybe off the topic, but I wanted to know if there's a nonprofit side as well.
Okay. The question is there a nonprofit side to these clinics? And Mike, maybe you could address that.
Frankly, for the brief advice clinics, we encourage, we focus the brief advice clinics mainly on small businesses. We do have nonprofit questions come up. It's really sort of luck of the draw if the people who happen to be there know much about tax-exempt organizations. So that is one that's very important to refer people to LegalCORPS for full representation. The sort of the adjunct, or I would say something that's similar that LegalCORPS provides for nonprofits that's a little bit like the brief advice clinics is called the Nonprofit Legal Needs Assessment Program, in which case they can come in. We have teams put together, they go through checklists and figure out what they need to do, which is very similar to what happens in the brief advice. They learn what it is they need to do.
Great. And so I will also say that sometimes people come in and they're not sure whether their business is a regular for-profit business or a nonprofit, and they need some help sorting that out too. So sometimes it becomes more general business advice with the nonprofit component, but yeah, often if there's something specialized, LegalCORPS has volunteers who are specifically assigned to that. So then, but resources available, what if somebody asks a question that you need a little help with too? There are some great resources, and the one that I have always really enjoyed learning more about is something that's put out through the state of Minnesota, Small Business Assistance Office, called A Guide to Starting a Business in Minnesota. This is available at all the clinic sites generally, and it's free, so people can order this or get this from the state, but it's also online. And it's just, in terms of all the subject areas that we talk about, it's good because sometimes there's just a reference point that, or you want sort of a checklist of issues to spot. And this is just a great resource.
I just wanted to point out that in my experience, because if the client walks in and they have one of those things, the more dog-eared it is, the more likely you are to get some question off the wall. Hey, I want to start a limited liability, limited partnership.
Right.
Operate my lawn mowing business. And you're like, no, LLC. real simple.
Exactly. Okay, so yes, Mr. Reeves was pointing out that a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. So if a client comes in with a very dog-eared copy of this that they've been studying, they may have the most complicated scheme that's listed in here that they think fits them, which is why, again, in the clinics, it's the attorney bringing their own wisdom and advice. It's sort of what sets us apart from LegalZoom, where somebody for $100 can incorporate their business or whatever it is. And I understand LegalZoom is doing well and going public, but they've got some trouble with attorneys general in various states because they don't give legal advice, and we do. And that's what sets our clinics apart.
I mentioned that we've got some out there.
And we have some, I'm not sure they're all up to date, but some copies of this out if anybody wants to flip through. Yeah. It's very interesting to flip through it, actually, and see how well this handles a lot of the questions that might come up, and some CD-ROMs, but out front. So now I'll hand it over to David to talk about some tips for making clinic sessions run smoothly.
Yeah, so I'll talk to the perspective of what we do at Target. At Target, we run our clinics a little bit differently because our lawyers aren't going somewhere, sitting down with someone face-to-face. We do what we call virtual clinics. LegalCORPS calls them long-distance clinics. But basically, we have lawyers in their offices connected to a small business development center somewhere outstate. Right now, we're working with a small business development center in Hutchinson, Minnesota. So clients come in to the small business development center in Hutchinson once a month. We have 4 time slots, half-hour time slots. They come in once a month, the same Thursday of each. It's like the third Thursday of each month. And then we have lawyers from our business lawyers and some of our litigation attorneys too signed up to fill these spots. And we run the clinics through a very simple camera on our computer. So when you're talking about a clinic like that, how to make it run smoothly, there are really 3 things to focus on. 1, the technology. 2 is, there may be some different ways to prepare for it. And 3, when you're doing a video conference, it creates some barriers that you want to take care of right away. So in terms of technology, we've been running the clinics for about 6 months. But it took us about 2.5 months to get the technology right. At Target, we have very sophisticated teleconferencing technologies. But it turns out that all we really use is a camera that we plug into our computer. And getting that camera through the firewalls to connect with the small business development centers was more of a challenge than connecting with India on a moment's notice. So if you're considering those options for your companies, make sure that you have enough time to figure out the technology piece. And then the day of, we always want to make sure that we have 1 or 2 people available before, at least a good half hour before the clinics start, to make sure that the hookups with the small business development centers work out. So in terms of the technology, I think that's been one thing that, through this process we've learned we need to invest a little bit of time because if you have lawyers available for a certain time period and you have clients available for a certain time period, you don't want to let the legs and getting the technology set up get in the way of the advice that you want. Also, preparation. So with the virtual clinics, we've set them up with a small business development center. So we get this client data sheet 24 hours or 48 hours ahead of time. And if you can do that, I highly recommend it. The reality is we usually get them as the client comes into the office. But the few situations where we get them in advance, the lawyers who are going to be staffing that time slot and the paralegals too can take it and do a little bit of research. So, for example, our lawyers, generally they're business lawyers, but they might not have experience with real estate or entity formation or intellectual property, and those are the big 3 areas that we see. Mostly, I think what we found, it's entity formation, but it's always good to brush up on that. So if you can do a little research beforehand, the lawyers feel a lot more comfortable, when they're asked those questions. Preparation. During the clinic, in the handbook on page 7, there's a pretty thorough list of things that you can do to make things go very smoothly. And I'll turn to that real quickly. You've got it right there. It really is true. You've got 30 minutes to do a number of things. You have to establish that relationship. You have to establish your credibility. You have to make the client feel comfortable. And you've got this barrier of technology that can sometimes get in the way with an audio lag or issues with the screens. So make sure when someone sits down across the screen, make sure they understand they have 30 minutes. Let them talk a little bit. but also, make sure that you can identify what their issues are really quickly. A lot of times they'll know. For the virtual clinics, as I said, it's a lot of entity formation. People with ideas about starting a business, they may have gone a little bit down the road, but they're not sure. They know they need to do something, but they're not sure. So it's getting their story, understanding their business, and then being able to start answering their questions. What I found also is during that advice period, the lawyer has a tendency to want to do a lot of talking, and it's always a good reminder to your volunteers to say, make sure you let those clients have some time to talk. A lot of times if people are nervous, they'll just keep going and going and going, and you can see the client on the other side just sitting there thinking, you can see, I really have another question, I only have 30 minutes, can you stop talking? So you want to be mindful of that too.
And lawyers aren't always the best at listening.
Not always.
That's their job.
Even though that's our job, we're not always the best at it. But I always like to ask a couple questions that I found have been really helpful. One is, right after the person starts talking about their issues, I always like to ask them, what are your goals for today? What do you want out of this? What are you hoping to gain? And that really helps frame sort of what we tell them back. If their goal is just to find out where to go for more information, then you can get through that really quickly and ask some probing questions, and maybe they have other issues too. Or if their goal is to have a fully negotiated commercial lease at the end of that session, you have to say, well, we're probably not going to get there, but we can talk about a few things. But I found that really flushes out a lot of issues and makes a very productive session.
Okay, so Kristen, maybe you can just talk a little bit about our reaction to David in terms of you've done a lot of the in-person clinics, some of which are the ones in the Twin Cities are mostly walk-in clinics, so it's whatever you get. Any thoughts about anything you can do to prepare?
The one thing that you can do is, David had mentioned, a lot of the people that do come in are focused on entity formation, so you might want to brush up on LLCs or S-Corps, because that's usually commonly what you would see or recommend. The other thing is just be prepared with what materials are available. Sometimes someone will come into the clinic and you don't know the answer. I've used a tactic of phone a friend. I've had an employment law question come in, and I think I kind of know, but I'm not really sure, and I'll phone a colleague of mine and say, hey, I'm at this clinic, can you help me with this employment law question? And in every instance I've done that, the person's been more than willing to help me, and so that kind of works well. Or I'll refer them back to LegalCORPS if it's something that I can't help with. Yeah. But I find that most times it's pretty basic questions, and you can usually point them in the right direction.
Yeah, if phone a friend works, that's usually the only lifeline that we get. But sometimes that works, and other times there are other resources. I have a feeling, and we've talked about this, that as technology evolves, there will be more and more available online too. There's the guide to starting a business. Now we're not sitting at a computer, I guess, unless we're doing a long distance session, usually that has an internet connection. But that's mattering less and less as people have smartphones and tablets and things that can pick up that information.
Most of our clinic sites, with the exception of St. Paul, most of them do have Wi-Fi connections, so we are increasingly encouraging volunteers there to bring laptops.
Okay. Just a couple more things on David's piece. For long-distance clinics, dealing with multiple volunteers, law students, paralegals, other people who might be present. Any tips there?
Yeah. So at Target, one of the benefits we have a lot of lawyers who are not. They have law degrees, but they're not practicing lawyers within the company. So we include them in our programs as well. But we all, with the lawyers in our department too, we've, to get people excited about this and not make them so uncomfortable, we staff each clinic with 2 or 3 lawyers and maybe a paralegal or 2. So it seems like a lot of people, but if you have someone who knows a lot about real estate, someone who might be a corporate lawyer, someone who might be knowledgeable about intellectual property, you have a lot of people in the office. And some people are on screen, some people aren't, and you want to make sure. So I'm going into a couple different areas here, but when you have so many people, sometimes that's a good way to get more volunteers in, but it also, some people might feel like they don't have anything to do, they're just sitting there wasting their time. So even though we have 2 or 3 lawyers, we have a 4-hour time slot the lawyers will alternate. So one person will observe, one person will be the, right in front of the screen there. It creates some issues about who's in the room and whether you disclose that to the other side. And of course, you want to disclose to the end user who is in the room, whether they can be seen on screen or not, just to make sure that they're comfortable with that. And we found that we haven't had any issues. If they've been uncomfortable, they haven't said so, and they haven't acted that way during the clinics.
Yeah, I know in St. Paul we used to get a couple of, potentially a couple of undergrad business students who signed up to observe, plus a law student, plus a lawyer. And, one of the tricks is to make the client feel like they're not totally overwhelmed. But you got to find out if they're comfortable. But usually if they know that these are students who are observers and that everybody has a duty to keep things confidential, usually there's not a problem with that. People are just appreciative that you're there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. David, let's see. We wanted to talk a little bit about conflicts of interest, too. In other words, if you get more than one client coming into the room.
One of the unique things about working with the small business development centers is that you have people from rural areas of Minnesota who have legal issues that, maybe they have a lawyer in town, but they don't necessarily want to drive to that lawyer's office, park their car outside, go into the office and talk about anything, because pretty soon the whole town is talking about, I saw your car in front of the lawyer's office. What's going on? Is there a business issue? Is there a family issue? So a lot of people don't go to that lawyer. What we found with the small business development centers is that they're more, a lot of family issues, a lot of business succession issues, and it creates a few problems. If you have a father and some children who come in and want some legal advice about business succession, you have different interests. You have the father's interests or the parent's interests, and you have the successor's interest. And so you have a conflict there because as volunteers of LegalCorps, you can't really talk to both parties without some kind of conflict waiver. LegalCorps has conflict waivers. I don't know if they're part of this book or not.
I think that you should explain that in your very first client, the very first client, the sons were going to be talking about.
Yeah. It was
Okay,
very,
yeah.
it was
Talk a little bit about that, Dave. That's an interesting story. That was the first clinic that you
It was
did?
the first clinic that we did, and it was there were about the camera turned on, and there were about 8 people on the other side, and some were like this, and some were you talk, no you talk. It was so you could tell right away that there was something going on, and it turned out that there was a business operated by 2 family members who. Another segment of the family felt like one family member was being taken advantage of and wanted to take over the business, but they didn't want one family member to know, and the other family member didn't really know that they were there, but was going to be coming to talk about some similar issues. So
This is right after we explained that running these clinics is really pretty easy at the community level.
Right. Yeah, LegalCorps was telling Target that this is a piece of cake, and then this is the first one that comes in.
Yeah, a piece of cake. So it wasn't, it actually turned out okay, but, we were able to talk with the people who were there and separate the conflict issues. But you have to be aware there are a couple different opportunities for conflicts to arise. One, it's as a volunteer for LegalCorps, conflicts can arise if you're talking to opposing parties. So be aware of that. But also, we haven't had this issue, but as other companies take this model, if you're if you're doing this clinic and you find out that someone on the other side has an issue with your company, well, then you have to. If I found out someone was interested in suing Target, of course we would have to change that advice session and probably find someone, some other resource for that person to go to. But
Right, and that's a preview of actually some issues we'll be talking about later on in the legal ethics session. So we need to move to Kristen's part of the program. I'll just mention that in terms of we mentioned providing contact information for later contact, and there will also be a little segment in the ethics portion about whether attorneys ever cross the line to soliciting business from these people who have come in for no-fee services, and that can be sort of a fine line. But we'll turn to Kristen, and on the what to expect aspect, what to expect from clients and yourself. One of the things that we talked about as we were preparing for this, just preliminary, is there a dress code?
There's not really a dress code, but I think the clients expect you to be professionals, and it helps to come in dressed in business wear, a suit or dress shirts, whatever you're comfortable with, but dress the same way that you would dress as if you're meeting with one of your paying business clients. We've had some clinics where volunteers have come in a little underdressed, looking more like they're going to some cowboy rodeo thing versus a professional business clinic. And I just think that for these business clients, they're expecting to see people who are dressed in a business professional wear.
Yeah, and I would say for the virtual clinics, there might be a different expectation. If you're dealing with someone in Bemidji or Hutchinson, there may not be the same expectation to see someone in a suit and tie. So, for what it's worth.
Or I suppose in the long distance clinics, you could have a jacket and tie and cutoffs, and nobody would know.
Flip-flops.
Sure. Okay, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the types of matters that might come into the door.
Similar to the long distance clinics, you'll see a lot of formation, contract issues, leases, employment, intellectual property cases that'll come through the door. It can be a wide variety, and you don't have the benefit of knowing in advance what's going to come through the door, but generally it does fall into one of those categories.
And we actually have another item in our survey was in all of the clinics, what were the subject areas, and about half of the matters were business planning and formation, so the entity formation issues, and the other half were split between IP, so trademark and some patent, advice on agreements and other. And so in the next part of the program, we're going to cover some of the substantive areas, again, without getting too much in depth because we don't have time this morning. Okay, well, what about things that can come up in terms of scheduling, Kristen? Too many clients, too few clients for the time slots?
With the walk-in clinic, you never really know if you're going to have your time slots filled or if you're going to have 6 people come and there's only 4 slots. Generally speaking, what I do when I do the walk-in clinics is I will bring work with me in case I don't have people coming in so that I can still feel like I'm doing something. Or if I do have a bunch of people signed up, I'll see if there's a way that I can make time for the people that are last on the list without shorting the people that did get there in advance for their full half hour. So it depends on what it is. There's some people that will come in and you can talk to them, and based on what they have, you determine, okay, you do not have a business law issue, you have a family law issue, you can refer them to something else, or sometimes you realize they can't do the business they want to do. One example I have is someone came in and he wanted to take the sriracha hot sauce and put it into mini packets and sell that. And I said, no, it's a great idea, but sriracha needs to be the people to do that, not you. He's like, it was just, he thought he had this great business idea, but it was a door stopper because he wanted to sell someone else's product under his label. So different things like that is what you can do. Sometimes, clients don't show up or don't show up on time. Like if they're on the list and you call them and they're not there, generally we'll try to go to the next client. Sometimes when we're at the library, they're just looking at different resources in the library. But the point is that you're there, you're available to help people, and you can make a difference that way. So I don't feel bad if I go one day and I only have 2 clients versus 6. I'm able to spend more time with those people and make a valuable impact on their business.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, it tends, especially at the drop-in clinics, it tends to swing wildly over time, so we can hardly predict it. But we do see sort of a gradual trend line of increase, more steady increase, so that the downtimes are much more unusual than they used to be. And I think it's just a matter of, as word of mouth gets out that this resource is even available to people, more and more people are taking advantage of it. And so as time and our efforts to spread the word about these advances, then I think that the downtime might become more unusual. However, they continue to surprise us. So
Right. David, I don't know, what's your experience with, do you usually get the same number of people as you have slots, or do people ever not show?
Well, I mean, it's a wide variety. So one of the things I was concerned about is if people don't show up for the clinics, then will our lawyers be turned off and not want to volunteer? And I think from our perspective, it doesn't take us any effort to go anywhere because everyone's in their office. So if someone doesn't show up or cancels, then it's like a meeting canceled. Everyone enjoys the extra time. But you know, that it happens, and you just have to be flexible with everything. Flexibility is the key here. So.
Well, right, and we've it's sort of bear with the clients, and because we've had some volunteers who've actually gotten sort of upset with clients who don't show up, and of course it's not the greatest, and we want to use our time effectively. But again, what our service is being available. And so, if you expect that there's a chance that people might not show up, just bring something to work on, or somehow, try to make the time productive. And I guess another message is, especially as LegalCORPS starts ramping up these programs, sometimes it takes time to get the right number of clients. Sometimes there are more volunteers than clients. So bear with LegalCORPS there too, because again, we're all part of something really exciting, because this is not something that's happening everywhere. And it's an opportunity to do business law pro bono, which again is sort of a unique opportunity.
Yeah, business law pro bono itself may be surprising to you. It's relatively new in the pro bono world, and it is a work in progress. So.
Well, absolutely. Okay, so basically, bear with us. Some other things that can be interesting, that may be unexpected at the clinic sites. As Kristen mentioned, you can get some people with some ideas that are interesting, but you sort of scratch your head about, or some sort of wacky products or inventions. I know I had once when I had our summer associates coming to observe, this guy walked in and he started to pull out portraits of, and they were like Renaissance-style oil paintings of dogs. And he said this was the business idea, that his spouse was a really fine, classically trained artist, and this was their business venture. And so it turned into something, it was like, what? But it turned into something really interesting. And that's part of the fun of doing this, is that, sorting through the ideas, because people have such different ideas about how to make a living. I don't know if other people have had experiences sort of like that, but.
Not like that.
Well, not like that, but it could be something unexpected.
Yeah, it is interesting though. You have people who really creative people with a lot of business ideas, and they just want to try to get something going. So it's a wide variety, really, really wide variety. And
sometimes you have a language barrier. We've had that certainly in the metro clinics where people come in from an immigrant community. Fortunately, the times I've had that, there have been maybe a couple of people, and one of them speaks English better than the other, so that becomes sort of the vehicle for communicating. But we've always managed. I don't know, Kristen, if you've...
Yeah, I've had the same experience where they'll bring in either a friend or a kid who is able to speak English better, and so they'll kind of use that person to help translate.
So we always manage, or if you can't, then they might have to get some other sort of resource or come back when they have a translator. Okay, Kristen, as we're wrapping up this segment, maybe some tips for communicating with clients and trying to explain things?
So one thing that I would point out is a lot of these clients aren't going to be sophisticated as some of the business clients that you would deal with in your firm or corporate culture. So the thing that I try to do is I don't try to regurgitate statute references or anything like that. I try to speak down to a level that they can basic understandings, avoid the legalese, and speak that way.
Okay. That's a good tip, because sometimes it's hard to remember to shift gears from those of us who are in private practice dealing with sophisticated business clients to, and some people come in are pretty sophisticated. You just get a really wide range, but trying to break it down. And the handouts are helpful for sometimes going through a checklist of points. Okay, well, and then just, Kristen, dealing with the situation that, hey, this isn't an area that I practice in all the time.
Yeah, and so I'm very comfortable dealing with that situation because I don't find any clients who do ATM law. They don't walk in the door very often, so it's hard for me to get an area where I'm super comfortable. However, the thing that it's a lot of the clinics, you're using common sense. You have resources that are available for you. Like I said earlier, you have, if you don't know the answers, you may have colleagues who could know the answer that you could reach out to. You can use the guide to starting a business. But a lot of times I've never been in a situation where I didn't feel like I could help and point them in the right direction at the very least.
And again, one of the things we're trying to do with this training in the next session about some of the legal basics is not, again, to give a complete overview, but just to give some points, some talking points, and some vocabulary to work with. And then keep in mind that no matter what, do your best. We're providing a tremendous service, and it's something that somebody's getting advice from a trained attorney and for free, and it's just tremendous. So we should all feel good about that. So, Mike.
Oh well, I mentioned what a lot of our volunteers, especially when they come from organizations, law firms or corporate legal departments, they will often sort of ease their way into the brief advice clinics by coming as sort of an observer or as a partner with a more experienced attorney the first few times. And I've seen that frequently. I've been there once or twice, observing, and then the next time they feel very confident. And everyone tends to find out you know a whole lot more than you think you know. You're not, this is not a bar exam or exam at a law school or something. This is helping people who don't know a lot of things that we take for granted. Again, keep in mind that we're providing a great service, maybe better than you think. Before we move on to the next segment, for those of you who are going to be involved or are contemplating being involved in the long distance virtual clinics, I want to introduce our new coordinator. It's Mickey Schoeneman here. You want to take sometime if you're in that territory during a break sometime to introduce yourself to Mickey and you can get acquainted.
Great, and thank you very much to David and Kristen. I don't know if I'm hoping you can stick around too. We're about a half hour from a break, and so I'm hoping that we'll all be able to chat a little bit too. So with that, Steve, did you have a?
I cannot underscore the importance of that. We cannot underscore the importance of that. Sometimes you have somebody who comes in and they have some business idea, and it's non-risky business. They're going to make little crochet things and sell them. And they're all caught up in how they're going to form their S Corp versus their LLC. All them go start their company, they can do this sole proprietorship, they can get their business off the ground, and they can kind of work on that stuff in the background. So sometimes, I'm just saying that the common sense piece, right? I mean, if they tell you they're starting a lawnmower business, right, or they're going to be cutting down, trees on people's houses, yes, form your LLC first, right? But just keep that in mind, because I think we don't necessarily emphasize that much. There is common sense advice and legal advice we have to be focused on.
Great, and I'm hoping that came through on the video, but I'll just repeat a little bit that common sense advice, can be just as important as the legal advice. So people can get caught up in the entity sort of selection part of things, but keep in mind sort of what business they're in. And one of the big things that we're trying to do is help people get over this fear of starting out, and so try to help them get started. Well, great, thank you guys. And so I've got John and Justina coming up, and John, take the photos.